Hi, Jen. This is Tracy. Welcome.
Hey, Tracy.
See you later. We'll get started in just a minute. We wanted to give a minute or so for people to just kind of get in and get settled. I'm going to apologize in advance if anybody hears my crazy dog barking. He just got home from daycare and he's mad that nobody's paying attention to him. So
This is Jen. I'm happy I'm not the only one who has one of those. He's currently at daycare, but when he gets home, he could go for a 5-mile walk and be very happy.
Mhm. Hi, Michelle.
Do introductions before we jump in.
That'd be great.
Okay, so
Sure.
first of all, let's welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you here today. Hi, Jen. Hi, Michelle. And we're here to talk about numeracy today, and it's a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. As many of you or some of you may know, we're really trying to look at ways to connect things like literacy and math and science to day-to-day instruction for the children that we support, and as well as their families and service providers. So I'm Tracy Evans-Luiselli with the New England Consortium on Deafblindness, and I'm thrilled to have with us today Helene Gallagher, who is our ed consultant from Vermont, and Brenda Allair, who wears many hats, mostly in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but it depends on what day it is and what we pull her into. So welcome, Brenda. They're going to be the leads for today's presentation. And then our project associate, Damari, who was incredibly gracious to put together the materials and such for today's session. Really excited to have everybody on board here. So Brenda, take it away.
Wonderful. So before I get started, are you parent, teacher, both, neither? Jen?
So this is Jen. I actually work for the Wisconsin Deafblind project. And so we are trying to figure out how to do more numeracy things in Wisconsin. And so I saw this and I thought, this is perfect. I need to jump on. So thank you for letting me join.
Absolutely, and welcome.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm
Hi,
from
Michelle.
Vermont. I am both a parent and an intervener, so I wear both roles. And I'm also the president of Vermont Hands and Voices, which is really not relevant here, but I feel like I should always be upfront about what I do.
It's always good for me to know who's who and just like tap into your brains as well as we're kind of starting to present. And Sharon, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I was a couple minutes late. I just finished another meeting. I'm like, I have to go learn about math.
That's okay. So I'm excited to have everybody here. We are recording, so we'll share this out, after the presentation today. We're going to talk a little bit about both sort of early numeracy, and Helene's also going to kind of expand on that, on things that we can do with some of our older students as well, or students that have, moved beyond foundational skills. My background is as a TVI, and also primarily in kind of early mid childhood. I'm like the birth to 12 kind of a person. So I've worked with a lot of very young kids in my career. That's kind of where I come from. And so, when we were thinking about this presentation, we talk a lot about literacy when we're talking with families, and in early intervention, there's a big focus on literacy. But we don't always explicitly have conversations around numeracy and what that means. And as Helene and I were kind of preparing for this, we also were thinking a lot of families don't feel confident around sort of number sense and what does that mean. There's not a lot of engagement in that conversation. And so we wanted to bring that to life a little bit, partially to help families understand that, there's ways to present sort of math concepts, even to really littles, and also to our students that have really complex needs. And so I'm going to kind of present this both as a like parent/teacher model, and we're going to make sure that you guys have lots of resources as well. So Damari put together a packet that everybody, I think, received, sort of skewed towards each skill set. And so the first thing that was in the packet was this really great counting book. I'll have to unblur my background, I think, at some point. I really like this book. It's a commercially available book that includes Braille. So, you know, for families, when I'm talking to families of young kids where we're not sure if a child might be a Braille learner, we maybe just want to expose kids to Braille. These are great. They're just available commercially, and then families can sort of start thinking about tactile components. The book itself also has some really nice tactile features. So if you haven't explored it yet, like the balls are kind of got a little bit of a rubber feel to them. The sticky worms are my personal favorite. I have kids who love that feeling and kids who hate it. And I also really like that every page has the number both in print and in Braille. So one of the things we talk about for learners is, while this is a board book, and it might be sort of ideally geared towards younger children, it can be used with older children without being age inappropriate, right? So if you have a child who's in, say, a 4th or 5th grade classroom, we don't necessarily want to be using toddler level materials with them, even though they might be at a skill level that's younger than their chronological age. And so a book like this, where, you know, it's got some appropriate pictures, it has numbers, it has Braille, is a little bit more appropriate for that student's age, regardless of kind of their developmental level. So that's really important. I like families to have these kinds of counting books and also in classrooms, because we can kind of prime for learning, right? We can think about just reading along with numbers, even families who aren't really thinking about math exactly, math concepts. There's a lot to be built in here. So this is one of my favorites. There's a couple other really good books I like that have the bumpy texture. So there's a ladybug counting book. A lot of them are really just commercially available. So I'll often encourage families to just go to the bookstore and see what's out there. I think certainly within the last several years, more of those tactile books have been available. There's also a couple good books from some of the like APH and those kinds of suppliers that have those tactile features. And for children who are using ASL or maybe being exposed to sign, counting and using sign, obviously important. And sometimes there are books that have the sign as well, so the number sign, so families can start using that as well. So I think that's important. I love counting bears. I've had these are the ones that came in your packet, but I have had them for a long time to work with my littles. So we will sometimes sing songs with the numbers. So 5 little ducks, the 1, 2, buckle my shoe, anything that's got kind of those numbers as part of the song. I also have put, I'm gonna unblur so that you guys can actually see stuff. So now everybody knows I have a Disney room. I have added some Velcro to these little guys and put them on one of the APH like folders. You can use any kind of, you know, Velcro board or material to add them. For the students who really have decreased vision or maybe need this moved much closer to them, or for whom like touching this is not safe, right? They might be mouthers. You can use larger objects, but if you're trying to get to something like creating a pattern, I love these for pattern creation. For some kids, right, we only want to use certain colors. I wouldn't put all of this on one student's board. But I start with just introducing kind of 1 and 1. So 1 yellow bear goes in 1 yellow cup, right? And for some kids, that's enough. There's a nice auditory component. We don't have to care that it's a bear. We can make a nice sound. We can shake it. It can be a really nice sensory activity before it's even a numeracy activity. And then you can expand that for children who are able to see color, right? Then we can have a nice, put the yellow bear in the yellow and the red in the red. For students who can't do that, you know, where they don't have color identification, and that might be for lots of reasons, right? I really like making the bear or whatever object you're putting in textured. So for example, if you have some of those bingo chips, you can add textured stickers onto there. Super easy things, use a glue gun, just put a dab of glue. Anything that will just make it textured, so you can sort by texture and then label the cup with the same texture. So that's an easy way to kind of adapt that activity. And then Unifix cubes. I love Unifix cubes. You can really use any kind of cube that clicks together. Duplo blocks are great for this, for our really littles or kids who don't have good gripping ability, because they're pretty sturdy and they're fairly adaptable. You know, they have that same smooth surface. So if you wanted to put on any kind of texture, you can add like stickers and things like that. But we can use these for things like how many. It's easier to count for kids if you can be holding the solid object and pull off. So 1, 2, I've got some tactile feature there. I'm using some motor skill. I can hear it. That might not be true for all of our students, but I can hear that sound. So 2, 3, we're talking about grouping. So again, other students in the class might be using Unifix cubes for higher level activities. We can still use these. It's still the same manipulative, or Duplo blocks, similar concept, to be teaching a skill that's more appropriate to their developmental level. So that we're still teaching math during time for math without an expectation that it's sort of commensurate with the other students developmentally. What we don't want to be doing is using kind of materials that aren't appropriate for that child, or just saying, oh, they can't do math, right? Like, oh, we're not going to do math with this student. I don't hear it as much anymore, but I do occasionally hear, right? Like, oh, they're not at that level. They're not at a math level. Well, everybody's at a math level, right? It might not be calculus or statistics, but we can still do math. So thinking about what are the fundamental skills, and Helene's going to talk a little bit about that. But I also think like really thinking about math and numeracy as embedded into all the activities that we do. So as we were thinking about this particular activity around sorting bears or creating a pattern, those are things that they can be part of a fine motor activity. You know, the OT can be working with that. They can be part of work with the TVI who's maybe working on visual scanning. So rather than thinking of time for numeracy as its own discrete skill that we're working on, we want to think about ways to embed numeracy in all of the other activities that the student is working on throughout their day. And I think it also can support the skills that we don't often think about, like AAC use and, you know, communication and listening skills or signing skills. For some kids, you know, making the number signs is a lot easier than trying to make some of these letter signs, right? So maybe we start with that. So those are just some of the early skills. Obviously, I could talk about that all day, but I want to give Helene a chance to talk a little bit more about, once we've worked with some students, gotten a sense of where they're at with their numeracy skills, what might we do then when they're working towards a little bit higher level skills, but still need some adaptive support? And so Helene, take it away.
Thank you, Brenda. That's really great. And And I appreciate what you were saying about kind of math, like reading, is a journey, right? And so everyone is somewhere on the path. So everybody is a mathematician the same way everybody is a reader. It's just a matter of whether we're emergent or somewhere in the middle or more advanced, right? And that doesn't necessarily coincide with a student's age. And may have more to do with experience, especially when we're talking about students who are deafblind, and it may just be a matter of the experiences that they have had been different or possibly limited on account of that vision and hearing challenge. So when we were planning our talk for today, I had to go back and look at numeracy to kind of define it for myself, because I thought, well, how big is this thing called numeracy, right? Where do we begin? Where do we end? And so the best definition I found that I could kind of latch onto and frame my thinking was numeracy is the understanding of the role of math in the world and being able to use it purposefully. And so I think that is kind of a nice definition, because it makes it really accessible for everybody, and certainly at home too, right? Because it's math in the real world. We see it every day in our homes, the same way we do in our schools. So what I want to do is talk about a little bit about the progression of skills, because I know as an educational consultant, sometimes when I'm asked to go into a school and kind of help figure out where to start on the path of math, we like to go back to, well, what does the research tell us about the order in which these skills are typically learned? Now, understanding that there is no typical, right? But we want to have a kind of frame of reference to go back to, a starting place, and then the children will show us the way. So as Brenda had mentioned, we often start with songs and chants, because rote counting forward 1 to 5 is really the first skill that children tend to learn. And then from there, 1 to 10, and then counting backward just from 3, 3, 2, 1, backward from 5, and backward from 10. At the end, we'll be sharing some resources in a document that will outline this nicely for you. So feel free to kind of take it in, but no need to kind of memorize or worry about it, right? Just be present. So some of the songs and chants, Brenda mentioned a few. I also like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I caught a fish alive, right? Those types of songs. And we can be using some manipulatives with those, perhaps for students that can access those. The songs can be a good warm-up for any other math activity that you're doing. So even when a student has progressed along the math continuum and is working on some possibly more complex skills, it's a good idea to start with a warm-up. So, and we want to keep it age respectful, which is something Brenda was talking about a lot also. So while some of our older students may be working on emergent skills, and we want to still do songs and chants, maybe we're looking for some raps that are age appropriate. And so what are some things that we can be doing to work on counting? So maybe we're counting 1, 2, 3, the adult is counting, and then building that anticipation. As we do with a child, you might say 1, 2, 3, right? And lift them up in the air if it's a little kid, right? Maybe for a little bit older kid, we're going to blow the bubbles. And so over time, once you've established a routine and the student knows what to expect, we can begin to see if they're developing an anticipation that you're going to blow those bubbles after you count to 3. And sometimes our students may not be able to count yet aloud themselves. So what we recommend is that we tell the student to go ahead and count in your head. So I'm going to count to 3, you do it in your head, count along with me, right? So that's one way to do that. Another way is to use an AAC, a voice output device, a kind of a switch that there are step-by-steps that you can record each number, 1, 2, 3. That's something you can also do. You can also just keep it open-ended and have a student hit a switch that has several numbers on it and tell them, hey, tell me what number you'd like me to count to. And that way there is no wrong answer. It's just an open-ended kind of fun activity. And so then if they say 7, great, you count to 7, right? And you say, you do it in your head. So that's one way to do that together. Another thing we look for is kind of patterns in numbers. So also known as subitizing. A little bit tricky for a student who may have more of a vision impairment or possibly blind, right? But we want to develop a number sense. So this is where we can use a 5-frame. And for those of you that received a kind of tackle box, this type of thing was sent out to some folks, you can just go ahead and cover up the other rows. So there's enough for 15 in here, but you can just cover up the ones that you're not quite ready to engage with yet. And count on those, the 5. We also look at dice at this point. So maybe you've got an adaptive set of dice that are larger, that are soft, that are easier to throw, or perhaps roll down a kind of a ramp or just drop on the floor. That all that is great. Perhaps you're doing it on an app so that the student taps with their whole hand and it rolls the die for you, or you use a switch to activate it, or a spinner. That kind of activity. It can be fun to incorporate instruments with this too. So they spin the spinner, it says 3, and okay, great, we're going to shake that maraca 3 times. So you're adding that auditory component too. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. All of those are great ways to practice that. And then we're moving into identifying numerals, 1 through 5 first, 1 through 10. You'll notice a pattern here that's often 1 through 5 first, and then 1 through 10. Okay, so this is where you're bringing in those counting books like Brenda showed us. We're going to, at the end, look through a few more visuals. We put a few slides together because we kind of feel like seeing is believing, and you kind of have an aha moment sometimes if you see some examples that others have come up with. And I'm sure you've probably come up with ones that are even better than the ones that we'll show you today. But you can use textured number cards too. We'll have an example of that. The wiki sticks, that was something that Damari had included in some of the sets. So kind of look like this, and they're bendable, and you can put them into the form of a number, which is really kind of fun. Okay, and then we move on to one-to-one correspondence. So that's where we really begin to understand that each object stands for one item, right? So we can do that in our tackle box also. We can do it with an egg carton and put little pom-poms in each of the little holes where the eggs would go. Maybe you make a homemade abacus. Can be done with spools and yarn or objects across a pipe cleaner, and you're pulling and counting 5 items. For a little bit older student, maybe you're setting the table and it's recognizing that for each place setting, it's 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 napkin. For a little bit younger child, you can do the place setting, but make it really fun with a tea party, right? For your dolls or what have you. Maybe you're planting seeds and putting 1 seed in each pot. The student is partially participating. That's great. I'm thinking about Valentine's Day coming up. And so maybe we're putting in class, oftentimes we make those little mailboxes, perhaps out of a shoe box or what have you, right? And putting 1 Valentine in each of those shoe boxes, now you're doing one-to-one correspondence. So a great fun way, fits in with what everybody else is doing. Okay, then we move on to comparing quantities. And that's where we're starting to look at those concepts of more and less and the same. So for that, you might be working on a number line, and we'll show some examples of that on our slides. Perhaps you're using the Unifix cubes. Again, that wonderful Damari put together these kits for us, but you can use these to make towers. And if you're comparing, I'd recommend using 2 different colors probably, right? But you can stack them on a flat surface and then show that one is taller than the other. So that's got more, or you can put them flat, you know, on the surface like that and see that one is longer than the other. So that must have more. Another way to do that. And then we move into ordering numbers. Again, 1 through 5 first, then 1 through 10. You could use number cards for this. You could match to sample. So to start, I wouldn't expect a student to take 1 through 5 and put them in order, right? But you might have 1 through 5 out in number cards and then have a second set, and then you're matching them, right? And then maybe they've got a tactile component. Maybe you're also incorporating sign language, tactile sign, all of these pieces per your students' needs. Okay. And then we moved to addition and subtraction, where you're composing and decomposing. So Brenda had talked a little bit about that too, but if you start with kind of I didn't count this ahead, but if we started with a stack of 10, we could look at all the different ways that we can build 10. So 10 can be 2 and 8, 10 can be 3 and 7, etc. So looking at all those different ways to compose and then decompose. And then graphing. So we're going to show you some examples of what you might do with that. One easy way to do it that I've had success with in the classroom is to hand out Post-it notes to, and this can be done at home with your family. You can give Post-it notes out to everybody, ask a question, but provide the choices. You've got to keep it a closed choice so that you don't end up with 20 different responses in a really big graph, right? But if you had 2 or 3 choices, people can vote, put their name on the Post-it note, and then those can be all color coded. So let's do an example. So maybe it's Thanksgiving time in your house and you've got a couple of relatives over and you're looking for something to do. And so, okay, everybody, we're going to vote. What 3 desserts do we want to have? Do we want to have, pumpkin pie, apple pie, ice cream, right? And each of those get their own color. So the pumpkin pie is going to be an orange, et cetera, right? And so people take the Post-it note that matches the thing that they want to vote for, and then those can be stacked just on the table in front of you, really. And then it kind of naturally makes a bar graph to show which had the most and least. For older students, maybe taking a poll, right? Which Super Bowl team is going to win? This or that, right? Play Would You Rather. And each response could be represented by a bingo chip. So I know my kids used to love playing this game, right? But because you can have some kind of silly type questions, which kids sometimes like to do, use their imagination, right? Like, would you rather walk on the moon or would you rather, I don't know, go scuba diving, right? Just so you can get silly with it. And people can vote, and then you can graph those out too. So just some ways that you can bring those to maybe some older students and still keep it age respectful and engage other peers, so that now you're doing the math and you're incorporating the social skills too, which is really great. For measurement, of course, there's good old baking and cooking. If your child or student is interested in doing that, that can be really fun. And it could be something really simple, right? Like Tracy and I were talking the other day for one of our students that perhaps the student just wants to get involved in making pudding, right? And you've just got, for instant pudding, you just got your mix, your milk, and an immersion blender, right? And putting everything in order. If we can present it from left to right, that's always great. Students can help get the materials ready and then put them away, clean them up, so that we're not having the fairy godmother syndrome, right? So they're knowing where the items are coming from, using them, and then putting them away. So before we show you the slides, just a couple of tips, which is repetition with variety. So over time, you want to take the things that you're working on and generalize them across different materials. So Brenda had shown us the counting bears, great thing to start with. And then maybe we're moving on and we're counting some pom-poms. We're little dinosaurs, pencils around the house, whatever. Take whatever is of interest to your child or your student, and take those things and count them as well. So that we want to be careful that the student doesn't learn that only bears are 1, 2, 3, right? We can incidentally create a misconception about counting, that counting is just these bear things. That's counting. So we want to make sure that the whole concept of counting has been developed across different items. And then keep it fun, right? So if you're having a good time, chances are they'll enjoy math too. Like maybe you want to have a family game night. Some of those early games are great to work on, where you've got to, again, either roll the dice or maybe the partner rolls the dice and you help count. Maybe it's a spinner with colors, or yeah, good old Candyland when you're picking that up and you've got the color and you're finding the spot. And working with a friend or a sibling can be fun to do that too. And that's all mathematics. Okay, before I move on to these little bit of slides, and I promise they're not wordy at all. They're just visuals. Do people have questions? And are there people here working with either your child or a student who has gone beyond the math that we've talked about so far? Because it was hard to gauge for today, our audience, and we wanted to make sure that we addressed everybody's levels. We do have some ideas that could extend beyond what we just talked about. So I'm just curious to hear if folks were looking for that in particular today. And possibly we could come back and do another talk that that does move beyond some simple early mathematics. So just really quickly, is there anybody, you can put it in the chat or raise your hand or just go ahead and talk for a small group? No? Okay. Okay, Jen?
I was going to say, this is Jen. I think this is great. And I think it's a great reminder of a variety of different activities and probably materials that most families or schools have. I was going to say the other, in terms of games, Peaceable Kingdom, I don't know if you're familiar with those games, are great games. There's a game like Count Your Chickens, but they replace any broken or missing pieces for
Oh.
So
Oh.
we have broken things, not much, but we have broken pieces. And so they will send it to you for free. So that is a nice one. And a lot of those games are cooperative games. So no one wins. Like you either win as a group or you don't win at all. So that would just be one that came to my mind.
Nice. Okay. Are you looking?
Yeah,
I see
Jen, if you have a
Michelle.
link to that, that would be terrific. And I was just going to add, as Helene was talking, I was remembering a conversation we had a little earlier about how much math is learned incidentally by very young children that we don't think about. And so, if you're wondering how might I start teaching concepts, sometimes I will think backwards, like how do other children sometimes learn this? So for example, we were saying, parents will often point out and say, oh, the neighbor got a new dog. Now they have 2 dogs. So kids can start observing, well, 1 dog is less than 2 dogs, right? They added a dog. Now they have 2 dogs. Or, maybe the family goes out to dinner and the waitress comes with a tray and it has 4 glasses on it. And she puts 1 in front of each person. Well, that's 1-to-1 correspondence. Our kids might not see or hear some of those pieces. And so thinking about, are there ways we can be more explicit about that learning? So for example, maybe in the lunchroom, that student has on their wheelchair tray 4 cups and they give the cups to their friends. That's probably before they have milk in them, but that they have the opportunity to do the thing that they might not be able to observe or that they might have had limited opportunities to do. Maybe instead of, kids will naturally sort of count as they're walking. Maybe they're counting steps. Oh, I'm 1, 2, 3, I'm stepping with mommy. For our kids who can't do that, maybe as they're trailing the wall, we count the doors. How many classrooms are we passing? 1, 2, 3. Just adding those pieces in through the natural parts of their day, because that's how other children are learning these concepts. Yeah, they're not coming up with, I'm going to sit down with my 2-year-old today and we're going to learn math, right? It's part of their environment. It's just that most of our students, again, as with many other things, the incidental learning isn't going to happen. So how do we make that incidental explicit? And these are just a few ways that we can do that. I also think when you're talking to families, when we say it that way, it makes it sound a lot less scary than, well, we're gonna have to teach math. I need you to come up with some ways to teach numeracy, which might be a word they've never heard before. But if we think about, we're going to learn counting and numbers and more and less. And I always think about more and less. Any child who has a sibling, any parent who's ever had 2 kids at the table, immediately, she has more marshmallows than me. Kids very quickly, right, get a sense of this is more than this. And so maybe we give them opportunities to feel like, oh, one hand has these cubes and one hand has these cubes, which one has more, right? So they're they're not going to be able to necessarily visually identify that, but they can have small tactile experiences with it, or auditory experiences, you know, different things like that. So I like to think about what are the things in my environment that I need to make explicit for the students, and then have fun with that.
All right. Is it a good time to move to the slides? Okay, I'd like to do that. And then we can, please, if you have questions, be thinking about those, feel free to put them in the chat, but we'd like to address those too before we close today. Okay, so here we go. Hopefully this will work. You're going to let me know. Okay, whoops. Nope, too far, Helene, too far. Okay, is that okay? All
Looks
right.
great.
So we are looking at our NEC Family Storytime Numeracy event. I'm going to hope that I'm going to be able to do one page at a time. Okay. So we had talked earlier about identifying numbers and putting numbers in order. And this was one tool that was, I think, actually from Paths to Literacy, which you'll see us refer to quite a few times. Paths to Literacy is a wonderful, wonderful website that offers lots of ideas about literacy and math literacy. And so they had recommended these tactile numbers from Lakeshore. They're actually quite big too. I think they said they were something like 4 by 5. So they are as big as they look, and then some probably. And if you have a student with some vision, I wonder about even doing things like a simple game of memory. And maybe we don't put out 20 cards, but if we've got 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3, and we're just turning them over and matching, right? Simple things like Go Fish, or we adapt a Go Fish game, things like that. So keeping, again, fun. So counting books, this is from, this is a screenshot of a book that is in CVI Book Nook, which is another website that has quite a few books available, but there's a whole section on ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. And so counting in lots of different ways. And when we're looking at something like this, think about your learner in terms of the amount of visual information that you want to provide at a time. So you may want to kind of take an occluder of sorts. It could just be a sheet of black construction paper, what have you, and maybe just expose the spoon at first and let them look at that and say spoon and sign spoon. Just look at the word, just look at the number, right? So, and whatever order you present it in, I would recommend doing it in the same way, because we know routines are so important for our students. But this is it would be a digital book, right? With the option to print it out. I believe they're presented on similar to this, like Google Slides. So you can take them, and I believe you can actually change them a little bit to make them your own. And there are directions in there to do that. So that's something you can play around with a little bit. Here are some counting books, like we were talking about earlier. Making homemade ones can be really fun to do. And I actually recommend doing them with your student or child. That can be the activity, because now you're a writer, right? When you're composing a book, you're putting it together, and it gives you something to work on. And it doesn't need to be done in a day. Maybe today we're just doing the number 1. Tomorrow we're doing 2, or next week we're doing 2, whatever pace you want to go at. But I thought this was really clever because it's a lift the flat book, as maybe you can see. So on the left side, it has sign language, right? The number 4, and it has the number 4. And I have to move my little bar on the bottom. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. And there are little instructions that go with it in Paths to Literacy. This activity can be found there, but it talks about talking to your learner and saying, oh, 4, and let's sign 4. What do you think is going to be underneath? So you can kind of build that anticipation too, possibly have a guessing time. And if they guess like a really big object, well, would that fit under this little flap? You know, is it going to be 3 elephants? I don't know. You know, it's probably going to be something small, right? So, and then lifting the flap and go ahead and counting and checking your answer for a little bit of fun. Oop. sorry, I was trying to turn there we go. So the next slide. And here are some examples of number lines. And the top one appears to have some Velcro on it with a cube, and you can Velcro these Unifix cubes onto there as well. You can compare numbers on a number line too. So the one on the bottom right, what I like about that is that it's got the amount to go with that number. So it's showing 1 heart, 2 bows, 3 raindrops. I'm not sure. Teardrops. But the objects to go with it. There is research to support that when you're working with a number line, having the corresponding amount in an object above it or with it is important to help people develop that concept, that sort of oneness, two-ness, three-ness, right? Over time. And then number lines can be used later on, as we know, right, to do some simple math. So if I'm starting with 6, maybe I'm putting my Unifix cube on 6 and I'm taking away 1. Okay, I've got to go in this direction that's less than, and moving over that way. So a lot of work that you can do on a number line. This is a WikiSticks counting mat that I found online from Twinkle. It's a little website with a lot of different activities and free printables, etc. But I was thinking about the WikiSticks in our pack that Damari had given us, and you can take them and mold them into building the number 1 with your WikiStick. You can put a little ball of WikiStick in the 10 frame to count, right? And then it's encouraging you to add a little horn to your unicorn. Put 1 on there. And if you'd like, you can trace the number 1 or again, bend some WikiSticks with that. Or if you have a writer or someone who's working on writing, they can be doing this you can put the whole thing in a write-on wipe-off sheet and then use a write-on wipe-off marker and then go ahead and go for it and write ONE for 1. And they have them all the way at least through 10 in that pack. Oops. Okay. WikiSticks can also be used for patterning. Whoops, sorry. Oh, it's so sensitive. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Back, Helene. I hit my mouse by accident. My apologies. So you can use WikiSticks on, these can be like bingo chips or larger chips. And they're giving a little bit of a tactile component to it so they can feel that the X is different from the O to make a pattern. Thought that was really kind of a neat idea. You can also use your WikiSticks for graphing, right? So student places or presses WikiSticks to connect the points on the grid to create a line graph. This one also uses something called ang legs, which I had not heard of before until I read this article. But they are pieces. How to describe this? They're a material that you can use to make angles and study that. But you can snap them together, take them apart, show kind of, acute angle, obtuse, all that. But here they're using them to connect the dots, which I thought was a really great idea. So we have a link to the angles in our resources. So if that's something you want to look up, it comes in a really big set that can be used for a variety of math activities. This I thought was a cute idea for a paper plate pie chart. And so it's just paper plate at home, but then there are pieces of cardboard here on top. And then you can talk about how each person in the family has 1/4, right? That kind of a thing. I thought that was a great way to do that. You can also change the colors to make it a little more salient. If you wanted to just show maybe talk about 1/4, and then that 1/4 was yellow while the other is another color. And this slide just is another opportunity to think about different ways that a student can communicate their learning about mathematics or participate in a math activity. So this is the step-by-step communicator that I talked about earlier. And there's no limit to the messages. So it's saying you can actually count 1 to 100 if you were patient enough to record that and have your student do that. But sometimes especially in class, the class might count by 2s, count by 5s, count by 10s, things like that. So you can record that in there, and that will allow the student to more actively participate. I am having trouble advancing slides. I apologize. Okay. I'm not expecting that one can read this clearly. I merely wanted to show it as an example and then provide the link for you. But this is the high leverage concepts that All Learners Network provides on their website. All Learners Network, if you're not familiar, they're out of Vermont, and their role is to think about how to teach mathematics to all students. And I had the opportunity to collaborate with someone from All Learners Network on how to bring mathematics to students with complex profiles. And so it's really a great resource, and a lot of teachers find it helpful to look at how the skills progress. From this one is showing from pre-K to grade 2, but it does go all the way to grade 8. If you go on the website, you can find the one that would best meet your child or student's needs. And then similarly, there's just one more. These are the high leverage concept learning progressions. So they're showing how throughout the year, working from left to right, September, and then middle of the year toward June, what might those skills look like? What can we expect a learner to work on? So just gives you a sense of what you might want to work on next. Okay. And then I just wanted to reference the 2 articles where I had gathered a lot of the pictures and information, and then recommend some websites and apps that might be useful. This Empowered Parents has some of those counting rhymes. So if you're not very confident about your singing, like me, or maybe the student doesn't want to hear me singing, I like to have a go-to and have a video or an audio to go with it. So they have some of these counting rhymes that you can practice with your kiddo. I love Epic. I hope folks know Epic. It's a great website, and it's also an app where you can find books. And also some of them read aloud to you. Some of them you look at and read with the adult. But they have entire sections you can sort by. So you can say math books for kindergartner or what have you. Or you can say winter is your theme and then look for a winter counting book, etc. And then I like Khan Academy Kids. That's a great app with some math learning in there. And past the literacy we talked about. Toy Theater is a website that has a lot of teacher tools, but they work just as well as mom and dad and aunt and uncle tools too. So you can go on there and find a virtual spinner, virtual 5-frame and 10 frames, everything, fractions, telling time, measurement, you name it pretty much. They've got an interactive tool for, and many of them can be turned into a game, or you can just use the tool with the activity that you're already doing in class or at home. So those are just a few websites and apps. As I said, as we got going and thinking about numeracy, it just started to feel so big. So we realized that we're just talking about one little piece of mathematics, and it might be interesting to see what we could do next. But I will stop sharing now and would love to hear if folks have questions or comments, especially questions if there's anything that we might help work on together today. If you have a child or student that you're wondering kind of, not sure what to do next or anything like that, or if you have a great idea to share, please, we're all ears. Okay.
Helene, this is Tracy. I just wanted to add, as on-body tactile methods and communication grow and move forward. I've seen a lot more focus on body tactile cues for counting, and for even talking about comparisons and size and distance. So you may, for example, count on a child's shoulder or their forearm or their, the top of the hand, again, depending on the child. But I think a lot of those sort of tactile approaches are kind of moving into the realm of math as we know it. They certainly have as it relates to literacy, but it's just been fun to see that, and I think offers so much to the kids that we know really need those supports and don't have a lot of volitional movement of their own body. It really gives them a lot of additional information.
This is Jen. Tracy, I was just going to add, I was fortunate enough to go see a middle school student recently, and she has no access to her hearing anymore and very, very, very limited to her access to her vision. And the team has been trying to figure out, she also doesn't have a lot of tactile ability within her own fingers and all of that. And so they were trying to figure out different ways, and it was so fun to watch math. They were actually working on division. And so they were doing touches on the top for tens and touches on the bottom for ones. And so then she was able to then verbalize the answer right away. But it was fun to watch how this team, who told us they really had no idea what to do or how to do it, they had some really great strategies that they had developed with the students. And so I love the idea of that being more on body with numeracy for kiddos.
I was just going to add, I don't think there's no perfect way to do this. As long as the student understands, that's the secret spot, so with one child, you might never do that on top and then that on, like, just for a variety of different reasons, whether it's motor or their own learning history or confusion with sign language, who knows? But for other kids, you would. So it's just always bringing it back to, does that child understand the whole concept that you're trying to put forth? So I think sometimes we get caught up and it's got to be, like somewhere somebody wrote down exactly the way to do this. And for our kids, it's just, there's so many different ways.
I wanted to comment, sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice, but I loved how, Brenda, you started out with saying embed numeracy throughout the day, and how I really like that. I'm thinking of some of our older kids who aren't sophisticated numeracy people, and how sometimes, I've heard teachers say, I don't teach math, or I'm not doing math, because they're sort of thinking of like an old definition or an old, like, well, we're not, I don't want their parents to think I'm teaching addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, because that's not where they're at. And really, I'm thinking as teachers, if we can say, oh my gosh, we do, maybe the right word isn't math anymore. Maybe numeracy is the right word, to say that we do that all day long. We're, packaging, one-to-one correspondence. You put in one thing, then the next child puts in something else. Maybe we're cooking and you're dumping and, you're putting in a half cup and it's more embedded. So I'm thinking we as teachers sort of have to give a different message about that, maybe. I don't know. So I just love that, how you said that, and it really resonates with me. And I think that's something I can really share with the teachers.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. Thanks, Sharon. Well, I think we will probably be ready to wrap up if there's no more questions. I did put in the chat, if you didn't see, we will share out the slides and all of those resources. And Jen, I'll make sure to include that Peaceable Kingdom, because I think that's just such a great resource. So we'll add that one in. If anybody has any questions, after you sign off and you think, oh, I wish I had asked about whatever, you can certainly reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer any other questions. And thank you all for attending today. It was a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Jen, we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
We'd love to chat more. And
Absolutely.
thanks to Damari for her wonderful.
Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you,
Kudos to
Damari.
Thank you.
Round of applause.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, Sharon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.